Is Scott Bomboy. I'm one of your fellow students in History 641 class. This is my video of my annotated syllabus project, which I'm pretty close to completing for the week, and we have a Wednesday night deadline tonight. So I want to give you guys an update on where I'm at with my project. So what I'm going to do is I'm in Google Hangouts. I'm recording this live to YouTube to replay for you guys, and I'm going to share my screen and show you what I have currently on my syllabus, and there'll probably be like a 2 or 3 second delay when I do this. So far in my syllabus, I'm at the point where I've thought through my methodology. I've looked through the books that I did for the annotated bibliography. I've looked through your books that you listed on the shared spreadsheet. And I pretty much have my methodology done for the course description. I have it done for the learning objectives. I have it done for course readings with a methodology, and a methodology for my course outline. And the way I've structured my course is it's a survey course over a year. There's 2 halves to the course. There's the first part up to 1865. The second part is up to current times. And I have almost like a common methodology that's kind of an umbrella methodology over both parts of the course. And what I want to really do is explain my particular historiography, which is more of an interest in constitutional history as a subfield, get into the sources of my interest, the books I'm going to cite in my courses, and why I think it's an important subfield. So in my course description, what I have is an overview, and the overview is really more of what the students would see, and it really gets into 3 concepts that I feel are important concepts. We certainly saw this in Foner's book, and I see it every day in my field of work. And that's the concepts of freedom, equality, and democracy. How do those 3 things interact with each other? How are they consistent through history? And more importantly, how do people within their current time periods, how do they perceive or understand these 3 concepts? How do they work together? And how did their desire to have more or less of one of those 3 concepts kind of shape their times? So my overview really gets into that point, and my emphasis in part 1 is really understanding the core ideas and the debates in the founding period. And that was also my my book project for the 5 books that I read and analyzed. And really, my understanding from that is going to be listed in my methodology. And my methodology is to create a curriculum that extends critical thinking about the basic content in a U.S. history survey course to enable students to understand freedom, equality, and democracy, and how people in the past envisioned those same ideals. So I'm using the hybrid methodology, which is really a combination of political history, social history, cultural history, and legal history. And there is a subfield. It's not a big subfield. It's called constitutional history or constitutionalism. And the core book I'm going to use in both classes is from a professor emeritus from Ohio State, Michael Les Benedict. In his introduction, he actually gets into the theory of the historiography behind American constitutional history as a subfield. And his key quote here is, "Constitutional history must address the social, economic, and political issues that have precipitated constitutional disputes and the way constitutional principles have affected their outcomes." And what Benedict and other people in this field do is they look at a combination of everything in a time period. It's just not the politics and the presidents and Congress. It's social trends, it's cultural trends, it's economic trends, different subfields that we've seen in all our readings. And the way I've phrased my course or positioned my course is, once we get outside of the founding period, for each of those eras of 20 or 30 years, I will pick a key constitutional issue, which is a major Supreme Court decision, and then have the students read a synopsis of that, try to understand how people in that time period perceive that court decision and how we perceive it today in the context of freedom, equality, and democracy. And the way I want to structure my course is I want people to think about how individuals and groups in these different time periods perceive these 3 values of freedom, equality, and democracy, and how did they perceive the change from time period to time period. So each week, I'm going to have students explain what elements of freedom, equality, and democracy, how do they apply to the time period, and how do key groups identify them. And that by the end of the course, a student should be able to understand the core concepts of freedom, equality, and democracy, how they were defined within the time periods, and if at all their own ideals about freedom, equality, and democracy have changed on a personal level over the year of the course. And again, I'm going to use my Supreme Court cases as learning prompts to spark a broader discussion. So an example would be, which I have in my methodology here, is the Dred Scott decision from 1857. We certainly have a perception of that today, but back in the time period, there were two drastically different time perceptions of Dred Scott, which was a Supreme Court decision. The controlling opinion was from Chief Justice Roger Brooke Taney, which said slavery was legal under the Constitution, and it invalidated the Missouri Compromise, which led directly to the Civil War starting pretty much. So that's a key decision, and there's many layers and perceptions of that decision. So for my survey book, I'm going to use a popular book that's used in colleges, I think some high schools, by Alan Brinkley, who's a really noted historian. I think his most popular book is The Unfinished Nation, which I have a copy of, but I'm not going to use that. I'm going to use the concise history that he did, which is more of a multimedia thing, but it's kind of a narrow history that I want for this course, and that's called Connecting with the Past, and that's a 2-volume set. So volume 1 would be for the first part, volume 2 would be for the second part. An interesting book I'm going to use to frame the Supreme Court cases is from a historian and law professor called Melvin Orofsky. I know him from his biography of Justice Brandeis. He's also a professor emeritus, and his book, Supreme Decisions, takes one case or a collection of cases from each of the same time periods and puts them in a broad social context with a timeline. So by using those three texts together, they're actually all chronological, which is my organizational theme. They're all actually in the same time periods, which is great. And they all have different information that complement each other. So you'll find information in Orofsky's book you will not find in the survey textbook, and you'll find more of an amplification than what Benedict has. So those are my 3 core texts, which will apply to both courses. For my first course, I picked a book, hopefully it's in here, by Alan Taylor, which I believe won a Pulitzer Prize when it was published, called American Revolutions. And that covers a time period between 1750 and 1804. And to complement those books, I have selected readings which I would pick out on a unit-by-unit level. Some of these we're familiar with, like Banner's book. I have a historiography section. There are books I cherry-picked from the spreadsheet that we've all shared, including a book by Wilbur Jacobs on wilderness politics and Indian gifts, another book from Colin Calloway on the transformation of North America, which I believe is also kind of pre-founding. And my real methodology for picking out the books was I wanted different viewpoints from different types of historians so people could kind of like really understand all the angles to interpreting these key questions with my constitutional time peg. And now I'm getting into basically the second part of the course. I'm going to use basically the same methodology for the overview for the books. I believe I picked a second different book for part 2, which is aside from the 3 textbooks. This is by Michael McGurr, a discussion about the progressive movement. And I tried to find a really good book that's highly rated and highly regarded that covers a wide period of the progressive movement. And then I'm at the point where I have all my assignments allocated from my units. An example of a good example will be in my 3rd unit, which is really the 1877 and 1896 period. What I'm using in that unit will be Plessy versus Ferguson as my court peg. But the idea is to keep pounding on these 3 concepts of freedom, equality, and democracy, how they're interpreted within the time period, how do these cases serve as goalposts or milestones for culture and society, view these key issues. And that way we can personalize the experience to the students, and they can come away from the course with something they're really going to value, and it may actually improve their personal perceptions of their own lives and make them better citizens.